Between 1980 and 2000, the number of calories in the food supply went from 3,200 per capita per day to 4,000, roughly twice what the population needs. Now, those were available calories, not what people were actually eating. But even with wastage, there were more calories available. And for food companies, this posed a particular problem because people could only eat so much, even if they're overeating. And so they had to figure out ways to get people to eat more. And they were enormously successful in doing that. They put food everywhere.
Today, we're tackling one of the most pressing issues in health, the obesity epidemic. According to the WHO, 43% of adults were overweight worldwide as of 2022. And in the US, that number is nearly 75%. This is a staggering rise since the early 1980s. And it's been linked in particular to changes in how food is produced, marketed, and made available. Hi, I'm Derek Angus, a physician and senior editor at JAMA, and today I'm having a healthy dialogue with Marion Nestle, the Paulette Goddard Professor Emerita at NYU and a renowned author on food politics. She was also the keynote speaker at the recent JAMA Summit on Obesity, where we had thought leaders and experts from around the world coming together in the JAMA offices in Chicago to tackle the rapidly evolving landscape of obesity and metabolic disorders. Today, we're going to discuss how the food environment has shifted, why personal responsibility is an incomplete and inadequate story to explain the obesity epidemic, and where medication and policy may fit in. Let's dive in. So, Marion, we seem to have got ourselves into quite a mess with food. Several media outlets recently were all celebrating the 100-year birthday of Sir David Attenborough. And the whole world has enjoyed Sir David Attenborough because he's been telling us about the natural world we live in. And pretty much he himself would say, it's interesting that people keep watching my shows because there's really only three storylines. One is mating, the other is doing a bit of child rearing, and the third is trying to stay alive. And the main thing to stay alive is basically trying to eat while not being eaten. And and every life form on the planet has been trying to not starve to death. Even all the apex predators can just starve to death. And so genetically, all of life has been selecting and selecting and selecting for millennia and millennia and millennia, for millions of years, to try to conserve energy, to try to be able to eat whatever one can. And then suddenly Homo sapiens sort of cracks the magic of life and starts to create a plentiful food supply. We're the first species that's sort of ever done that, and we should be celebrating. And yet we seem to have got ourselves into this terrible pickle where now the way in which we're eating is causing effectively an epidemic of obesity, and however one defines obesity, and all of the attendant social and medical problems that come with that. And so I guess the first question to you, Marion, is how did we get ourselves into this pickle?
Well, I think the easy and quick answer is neoliberal capitalism. In two words. I describe it in a different kind of way because I like to start with 1980 as a starting point. Up until 1980, the prevalence of obesity in the United States was somewhere around 10 to 20%. Depending on which groups you were looking at. It had been like that for a very, very long time. And then starting in 1980, the prevalence of overweight and obesity started to increase quite rapidly. And between 1980 and 2000, Obesity went from roughly 15% of the population to 40%. And today, 75% of American adults are overweight or obese. It's become completely normalized. That's the norm. And so I like to ask the question, what happened in 1980 that changed things? Genetics didn't change. Metabolism didn't change. Physical activity levels may have declined, but they did not decline enough to account for the overall weight gain during that period, which was roughly 15 or 20 pounds weight gain during that period on average. And so I want to ask the question, what happened? Obviously, if it wasn't something basic biological, because that didn't change, it had to have been the food environment. And so I want to look at what happened to the food environment beginning in 1980. And I come up with three really telling things. One was the election of Ronald Reagan,
Right.
who came in with a deregulatory agenda. And one of the things that happened as a result was that companies were able to market junk foods quite freely to children. That it kind of opened up. They put an enormous amount of money into marketing to children and to taking other kinds of marketing initiatives. And part of the reason why they did that was because in the 1970s, agricultural policy changed to, instead of paying farmers not to grow foods, the Department of Agriculture told farmers to grow as much food as they could because they would reward them with subsidies depending on how much food they grew. So there was a huge incentive to farmers to grow as much food as they possibly could, fence row to fence row. And the result of that was an enormous increase in calories in the food supply. Between 1980 and 2000, the number of calories in the food supply went from 3,200 per capita per day to 4,000, roughly twice what the population needs. Now, those were available calories, not what people were actually eating. But even with wastage, there were more calories available. And for food companies, this posed a particular problem because people could only eat so much, even if they're overeating. And so they had to figure out ways to get people to eat more. And they were enormously successful in doing that. They put food everywhere. They made it ubiquitous. They put food into bookstores. They put food into clothing stores.
Into libraries.
Into libraries. When I first came to NYU, there were signs all over the library saying, don't bring food in
No
here.
food or drink. Exactly.
No food or drink. Now they're cafes, and the entire first floor is people on their computers with cups of coffee or drinks. So the result of that was food everywhere. And one of the rules about human behavior, if there's food in front of you, you will eat it. And then the third thing that happened was they made larger portions. And I keep saying, if I had one concept to get across to the American people, it would be that larger portions have more calories. I can hardly say it without laughing, but in fact, it's not intuitively obvious. And I can prove that it's not intuitively obvious because we did that experiment. We asked students at NYU to tell us how many calories were in an 8-ounce soft drink and how many calories were in a 64-ounce Big Gulp. And we didn't expect students to know that there were 100 calories in an 8-ounce soft drink, but we certainly expected them to multiply by 8. The average multiplier was 3. So we went back to the class and said, hey, you may be mathematically challenged, but you can't be that mathematically challenged. Why 3? Why didn't you multiply by 8? And they said 800 calories in a soft drink is impossible.
So,
it's not intuitively obvious. And so there you were in the 1980s, and a doctoral student of mine at the time, Lisa Young, did a dissertation on the introduction of large-sized portions into the food supply. during the 1980s. And there are parallels between larger sized portions, calorie intake, and body weight. Big surprise.
Yep.
If you eat more calories, you're going to gain weight. That's thermodynamics. You can't argue with that. I mean, there are big arguments about where the calories come from, but that has more to do with health than body weight.
And of course, calories, it's almost like they count more on the way in than on the way out.
They do.
Like, it's so easy to quickly eat 500
Yeah.
calories and a huge amount of work.
The way I do this is with Oreo cookies. An Oreo cookie is about 50 calories. You eat 2 Oreo cookies, you've eaten 100 calories. You eat the whole bag, you're in trouble. But you can't stop eating them, because that's the other thing that happened, was the introduction of ultra-processed foods. Junk foods that now have a particular category of junk foods with a specific meaning, industrially produced, lots of additives, high in sugar and fat. In general, foods you can't make in your home kitchen because they require industrial processing in order to have the texture and the flavor and the color that they do. They don't look anything like the foods that they were derived from, and they were formulated to be addictive and profitable.
Yeah.
Addictive quotes, because I'm not.
Yeah, some of them, didn't they even have ads like, bet you can't eat just one?
Oh, yeah. The famous Lay's potato chip commercial where Bert Lahr held up a potato chip and said, you can't eat just one. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
So if food is in front of you, you will eat it. If it's in larger portions, you'll eat the whole portion. We're human. That's how we do things. And people put on weight. And the rest is what we're dealing with, and confronting that and trying to change the environment is very, very difficult and politically impossible, because it requires taking on the food industry. So most efforts to try to do something about obesity blame the individual. It's your fault if you're overweight. Just stop eating so much, as if that were possible in today's environment. And the way I put it is, if you're trying to eat healthfully in today's food environment, you are fighting an entire food system on your own, and they're bigger than you are.
Yeah, so let's stay with that for a moment, because there are definitely some Hollywood movie stars with chefs and personal workout coaches, etc., and they can take on the food industry for themselves. Mm-hmm. But to your point, that it's if you want to make healthful choices, you're pushing uphill. But some people have to push a lot more uphill than others.
Oh, sure.
And certainly people in less resource settings, it seems like it's a disproportionate burden, because some of these foods that are most plentiful are also the only ones you can afford, no?
And the only ones that are available.
Right.
Because there aren't stores around. No, I mean, the socioeconomic disparities in the food system are blatant and very difficult to deal with, and the poor get hit with everything. If you look at demographics of overweight and obesity, the people who are least overweight and obese are white, educated, have money, and have health care.
Right.
Those are the main factors. And the people who don't have those things are the ones who have the highest prevalence of obesity. And also there are important cultural factors involved here. So that it's not enough. It's really hard to fix. So it's not enough to make sure that there's a really good grocery store in a low-income area to get people to change their food habits. You have to change.
If you don't have a cooker or a stove.
You have to change the culture. Yeah. Because if you don't have a refrigerator, if you don't have a stove, and many people in our society do not have these things. If you don't know how to cook, many people in our society do not know how to cook. It's much harder. And time.
So first of all, it's very miscast to frame this as personal choice.
Oh, I think so.
But it's also miscast, even though you're not making the decision, to frame it as something that adults choose to do is also missing the point, because this now starts young, correct?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, food companies market to kids. It was the first thing they did. During the Obama era, I was once at the White House at a meeting on food marketing. And Michelle Obama gave an eloquent speech about how she really wanted food companies to stop marketing junk foods to kids. And afterwards, we broke up and went into smaller groups. And in my group was a food company executive who said, I think marketing to children is wrong. And I wish we could stop, but our stockholders won't let us. And there it was, stated as baldly as I had ever seen it stated, that food companies are not social service agencies, they're not public health agencies, they're businesses with products to sell and stockholders to please, and that's their first and only priority.
Right.
Oh, that was the other thing that changed in 1980. Actually,
Milton Friedman.
It was the most important one. Wall Street adopted Milton Friedman. And Milton Friedman's argument was the sole responsibility of a corporation is returns to stockholders. Corporations have no social responsibility whatsoever. And Wall Street bought that as a result, I believe, of a speech given by Jack Welch, the head of General Electric, in 1981, in which he said, we want higher returns on investment now, and that's what everybody needs to be doing. And that happened. Right then, 1981, it happened.
Yeah, I think it was 1970 or so that Milton Friedman first wrote that piece in the New York Times. And not that I'm going to be an apologist for Milton Friedman, but it's interesting. He felt corporations shouldn't try to fix social problems because the CEOs of those companies were not really qualified and they weren't elected to do such. And so he framed it almost as taxation without representation. But what went wrong is he was silent on the role of government to take on solving those larger social problems. And so it's like the perfect storm to buy into Milton Friedman while also buying into a deregulated small government footprint.
Well, that's true, but corporations used to behave much better. Ford, for example, was famous for wanting his employees to buy his cars. They had to have enough money to buy his cars, so he paid them decently. IBM was famous for long, slow return on investment. Little old ladies clipping coupons, that kind of thing. These corporations had social responsibility. They took care of their workers. They made things in America. And as soon as that stopped and cost cutting became crucially important, that was when they busted unions. They sent their manufacturing offshore. And I remember being in a Department of Agriculture meeting in the late 1980s and hearing an official of the Department of Agriculture say that he didn't think America should grow food. He thought that we should use our land for recreation and housing and buy all our food from the third world because they could produce it cheaper. Some people believe these things. So in any case, what happened in the 1980s was, I call it the eat more food environment. And that's what we're up against.
Okay. So here we are, time rolls forward, and just decade upon decade since the 80s, this problem has just been getting worse and worse, with obesity not just growing in developed countries, but in developing countries. Everywhere. Mm-hmm. And actually, increasingly driving much of the healthcare costs that so many of our biggest diseases are often obesity-related, all of the cardiovascular disease and so on.
Well, remember, 3/4 of the adult population and somewhere between 20 and 30% of children are overweight or obese already. It's leveling off, by the way.
When I was in medical school, diabetes was about 2% of the population. 1% had juvenile onset and 1% could later in life, especially if they were overweight, develop an insulin-resistant type 2 diabetes.
Right.
And type 1 was juvenile because that was the only kind of diabetes you got as a kid. And now the rates of diabetes are fantastical.
Oh, yeah.
But it's not a rise of type 1. It's entirely
Type 2.
Type 2. And you don't need to be old to get it. It's you can get so-called adult onset diabetes as a child.
As a very young child.
Which is, it's a staggering. So time rolls by, all sorts of people in the healthcare profession and broader in society lament this obesity crisis, and no one really knows exactly what to do. I mean, people might know what to do, but there's a slight sense of powerlessness. No one is really bending the curve.
There's an enormous sense of powerlessness.
So a great prevailing, an overwhelming black cloud of sort of...
Right. I mean, and it's a wicked problem, meaning that it doesn't have a simple solution.
Talk about a perfect segue. For the first time in a long time, it seems we might have some momentum in addressing the global obesity crisis. GLP-1 receptor agonists have proven to be extremely effective for weight loss, among a whole host of other benefits. And here in the United States, at least, we have an administration that came into office campaigning on making America healthy again. So I wanted to get Marion's take. What role might GLP-1s play in lowering obesity rates? And does the MAHA movement represent a real opportunity to address the food system?
Oh, let's do the GLP-1 drugs because they're easier.
Okay.
You know, by this time, there's an enormous research basis on which to discuss them. And in addition to that, about a year ago, I spent about a year in whenever I gave a lecture, I would ask people if they were taking GLP-1 drugs and if they'd be willing to talk to me privately afterwards about their personal experience. And so I've heard lots and lots and lots of story. I have lots of case reports. And I have to say that my impression based on the case reports is very, very consistent with the research. And the research shows that these drugs are enormously effective in inducing weight loss in most people, not everybody, but most people, that the weight loss can be gradual or dramatic, and that it generally the weight returns if people go off the drugs, but not in everybody. There's a lot of individual variation. But in general, if you're on the drugs, you can lose weight. If you go off the drugs, you get the weight back. The drugs are also having profound effects on chronic disease risk factors. They're lowering blood cholesterol, they're lowering blood pressure, they're lowering symptoms of diabetes, they're lowering cancer risk, they're improving cognitive function, they're improving overall mortality. There isn't anything that you could think of that they're not good for.
And unless someone has terrible side effects with them, they generally feel good on them.
Or they are willing to tolerate the side effects because of the benefits. That's what I'm hearing personally. I've known stories of really amazing side effects, and the research shows that among a small percentage of people, the side effects are, in some cases, quite terrifying. But most people have gastrointestinal issues that they can deal with. You know, one person who's lost 100 pounds told me that he was constantly nauseous, but he didn't care because it was the first time in his life he was ever able to lose weight.
Well, and not just losing weight, but not thinking about food.
Right. Oh, yeah. The big thing. The food noise stops. And I had never heard the term food noise before. I love it. I just think it's great. And I get it completely. It's the idea that if you've got food around, you got to eat it. And you're thinking about eating all the time. And that stops for, again, not everybody, but most people. It stops cold.
And I think often when you're thinking about eating all the time, it's also with a little bit of self-loathing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's really, it fixes a lot of those kinds of things. It also seems to slow down addictive behaviors. alcohol, smoking, gambling. I mean, it's
Yeah, there,
the,
there
the
are
reports that
trials getting launched in Australia now for sports gambling.
the reports that are coming back on that are amazing, and it's having a profound effect on the food industry because the retailers are already able to track the decline in purchases among people who are on these drugs. And so the threats to the food industry these days are multiple, and they include inflation, which is just shocking, the GLP-1 drugs, the concern about ultra-processed foods, which the word is out about ultra-processed foods, and people are trying to cut down on them. People on GLP-1 drugs particularly, but everybody else as well. And then that brings us to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the new Secretary of Health and Human Services, who came in with an agenda to fight the food industry because he said the food industry and ultra-processed foods are poisoning America. Whether they're doing anything about it is something we can debate. But the talk at the beginning was pretty dramatic, and the food companies didn't say much. They waited to see what they would actually do. And I have to say they're not doing much, because Kennedy's view is, let's make this voluntary, not regulatory. We're not a nanny state. We think the purpose of what we're doing is to educate the public about what is healthy and what isn't, so that individuals can take personal responsibility for their diets. And so they're not doing policy.
But doesn't that just bring us right back to square one?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm very disappointed. I was hoping that they would I thought for sure they would ban artificial color dyes in a second, because that was an easy one. The companies are already selling products without those dyes in other countries. They know how to do it. They could do it in an instant. And even there, it's voluntary.
Presumably, there are, in theory, quite a lot of levers or tools open to the federal government for even modest regulation or incentives, even around how we feed our children, around efforts,
Definitely.
advertising to children, school meals.
Well, we have a completely Republican administration with a Make America Healthy Again agenda. Use it and get some regulations passed. I understand the hesitation because they've had to they're confronting a great deal of food industry lobbying around these issues. When the food industry realized they were serious and were actually going to try to do some of these things, the lobbyists came in. And, if you want to really do something about children's health, I would start with schools and fix school meals. But school meals are under so much financial pressure because they're expected to be profit making, or at least break even. They're the only thing in schools that's expected to break even. And school support has gone down. And the reimbursements for school meals have to pay for salaries and equipment.
And again, the problem with schools, at least in the US, is it's largely funded by local taxes. And
Right.
so people in more affluent areas can have more affluent school districts and so on.
Right. I mean, so, you want to do that. That's where you enact policy. You pay schools to produce decent food. You supply schools with the equipment that they need. You pay the staff decently, so you've got decent staff working there, and you buy good food for them to use. And I don't see any sign of that. The schools are supposed to follow the new dietary guidelines. We can talk about the new dietary guidelines. And, that's eat real food. Fine. How are they going to pay for it? I have no idea. I go to a lot of schools. I know what their problems are.
So here we are. In the past, one might have wondered, is big food remaining relatively immune to government pressure because it's highly effective at lobbying, or because government just doesn't care that much about trying to fix food? Regardless of which might have been the two explanations. What's interesting now is we have this natural experiment of a government that absolutely said it wanted to do something to the food chain.
Yeah, it's all talk, no action.
Which may be because it's, who knows, we can ask them to come on the podcast, but it might be because they're running into the reality of the power of lobbying. And
well, I'm surprised that they don't realize what it is, because that's what they did to Michelle Obama with her campaign in 2010 to try to reduce childhood obesity within a generation. And she was opposed in every single way by Republicans who said she was nanny state. And she was able to do some things, that legislate some things. She got the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act passed. That was a big accomplishment. And now the Republicans are undoing it.
So coming back to GLP-1s, right now, there are also issues of access to GLP-1s. They're expensive, etc. But a lot of the time, eventually, generics come on the market. It is possible that it's terrible that there's an access issue right now, but the market may take care of the access issue over time. The market with some gentle nudges, certainly there are. I heard recently there are companies in India able to start making GLP-1s at a fraction of the cost. We could see broader use of GLP-1s. And so that raises a couple of issues. They are fantastic drugs, but there's something odd about the idea of fixing obesity with GLP-1s. It feels like we've got this human-made sort of sociologic or socioeconomic problem, and instead of solving it, the root cause, we're just going to come up with a technologic fix.
Oh, I couldn't have said it better.
So that leaves me squirming. I think that for the people currently living with obesity, the idea that they could get their lives back with GLP-1 sounds fantastic. Mm-hmm. And if we went ahead to start fixing the root cause problems, it's not going to happen overnight. And so for all the people currently living with obesity, these drugs are amazing. But it seems like it would be a terrible thing to think, now that we have GLP-1s, we don't need to worry about these other problems. And so I wonder your thoughts on that. But then there's also something else, which is big pharma, like big food, is also very powerful. It's powerful at lobbying. And maybe you alluded to this, as people start to eat differently and as the food industry notices. I mean, if there were truly massive wide-scale use of GLP-1s to the point that people's diets really change, could it be that big pharma ends up making big food behave differently in a way that we as society and as government have never been able to do it?
I don't know. We're seeing signs of that. I don't think there's any question that the price of the drugs will drop. And when it's pills instead of injections, it'll be even easier. And I've seen business analysts estimate the size of the market, and they think it's going to triple in 20 years.
At least.
Or in 10 years. I mean, it's just going up so fast and that everybody will be taking them. And no, that doesn't do anything about the societal causes. But if people change their dietary patterns and the food industry changes the kinds of things that it's doing, I don't know, the food industry's kind of in trouble right now. And you see this in food company divestments, mergers, acquisitions. There's a lot of movement of CEOs and companies selling off their junk food lines of products and that kind of thing. Very hard to know how that's going to play out at this point. And to me, the big problem, the single biggest problem, is the Wall Street requirement, or the Milton Friedman requirement, that companies not only make a profit, but grow their profits.
Quarterly earnings reports.
The report quarterly growth If you've got 4,000 calories in a food supply, all companies cannot grow. They cannot. It's impossible. So to me, Wall Street has to change. That's the big change that has to take place. Wall Street has to reward corporations for making a profit, but a modest profit. Long, slow returns on investment, and reward companies for taking care of their workers, for taking care of society, and for thinking about the environment and the people who work with those companies and are customers of those companies at the same time. It used to be that way. It could be that way again.
So that presumably is in our power through our vote.
Absolutely. That's a political choice.
It's a political choice. While awaiting the outcome of future elections, I want to come back in maybe this final section of our chat to get your thoughts on maybe at a smaller scale. For example, the lived experience for a primary care physician or for people living in a given community. What are the sorts of solutions or things that you think we could try to do next? I think one of the things that you mentioned at the summit in Chicago is you said you would love it if doctors could really think about trying to be kind.
I'm a patient in the healthcare system.
Yes, I think even those of us who are physicians, when we are patients,
it's pretty rough. There are too many people who need help and not enough people to help. And the cost issues are astounding. And I'm somebody who has enough money to pay for decent health care, and I have a pretty good situation. And I'm still astounded by how difficult it is. And and I'm not even sick. I'm just old, but I'm not sick. So I think kindness would help, and certainly kindness to overweight patients who are not used to being treated kindly by the healthcare system, who are used to being blamed for something that they have an enormously difficult time dealing with. I'm told that the definition of obesity as a disease is very helpful. I'm told that the food as medicine movement is very helpful, and that way of thinking about it is helpful to patients. And so, okay, let's do more of that. But, the easiest way to help people eat more healthfully is to make sure they have enough money to do that, and enough education, which means doing some education. But I like to teach people about the role of the food industry in all of this, and make the point that they're dealing with businesses as they are with any other business in their life, and should not expect the food industry to be looking out for their health concerns. That's an unreasonable expectation. On a personal level, warning labels would help. Various kinds of food labeling would help. That's nice. But I'd start with school food. I really would. It's doable. I've been to plenty of schools that are doing a really, really terrific job. I've been to plenty of schools that are not. Because one of the realities of school food is that what goes on in a school is completely dependent on who's in the school, who the parents are, who the teachers are, who the principal is, whether anybody thinks that food is important. And even in schools where there are terrific principal, terrific school food service directors, if the parents aren't involved, they're sending the kids to school with lunchboxes full of junk food when the food in school is infinitely better. And I've seen that over and over again in New York City, particularly. So there's lots and lots of work to be done. But in a school, it's possible to do it. It's small enough so that if you have the right configuration of people and can bring enough people in the school on board, you could do something pretty powerful.
Have you seen examples of that?
Oh, yeah, many examples. And they bring tears to your eyes. They're so beautiful to watch.
Can you
You
tell
know,
us the story of one? Or?
sure. I was in a school in Harlem, in Upper Manhattan, a very, very poor area in which basically the 99% of the kids who went to that school qualified for free lunches. And they had a complete free lunch program. And I watched a class of teenage boys, it's middle school, teenage boys go out to these gardens and pots and pick salad, come into the kitchen, make the salad, dress the salad, and sit down and eat the salad. And there were about 20 boys there and the guests, and we all had our salad. It was quite good, very fresh. It had just been picked. And there was one boy sitting across from me with his arms folded and a scowl on his face. And he was not going to touch that salad. And it was late in the school year, and I figured nobody was going to say anything to him at this point. They knew what they were dealing with. But after a few minutes, one of the other boys came over and said, "Are you going to eat your salad?" And he shook his head fiercely, no. And the other boy said, "Can I have your salad?" And he said, "Yes." And I thought, this program is a phenomenal success. 2 out of the 20 boys didn't eat their salads. I would consider that an overwhelming success story.
That's amazing. So that's not just school meals. That's a whole thinking about the entire ecology of food.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I've been to grammar schools, again, in very, very poor areas where the kids are lining up for the salad bar. I've seen it. It works. And what it involves, and this is to your point precisely, is everybody in the school knows the name of the kids, interacts with the kids, talks to the kids about food, notices if the kids aren't eating it, asks them why they're not eating it, asks them to taste things. It's all part of the general education and done organically in a way that's just beautiful to watch.
And did you get a sense of who drove this, or was this like
It differs. It differs depending on the school. Sometimes it's the principal. Sometimes it's the school food service director. Sometimes it's the lunch ladies. Sometimes it's teachers. It varies. I mean, what's so interesting about the school lunch business is how personal it is. And I learned all this from a private school in New York, from the famous Chef Bobo. Okay, it was a private school, but I watched what he had to do. He came into a school that served fast food. The parents complained, and he was working at a culinary school. His life dream was to cook for kids. It turns out there are people like this. And it took him about 3 months talking to the kids, talking to the parents, talking to the school food service people, just absolutely out there, asking them to give him a chance to try it, promising them that if it didn't work and the kids hated it, he would change things. And by the time I saw it after 3 months, the kids were begging him to work in the kitchen, begging him to teach them how to cook, complaining to their parents that the school food was better than what they got at home. It can be done. It really can be done. It can't be done everywhere because those people don't exist everywhere.
No.
But where it can be done, it can be done. And it's a very, very good thing. Alice Waters had this idea of school gardens. Everybody thought she was crazy. Now I think her program is in 3,000 schools. And there are programs in schools everywhere. There's wellness in the schools. There's Spoons Across America. I mean, I could just name them one after another of groups of people who are in schools trying to help make this happen, because everybody knows how important it is. You teach kids how to eat healthfully early on. That's lifetime skill.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like the give someone a fish versus give someone a fishing rod.
Oh, I'm a great believer in that. I like that philosophy a lot. I do. I think everybody should know how to cook. It would solve a lot of problems. We don't teach cooking anymore. I learned to cook in the 8th grade.
Should know how to cook and be in a position where they can cook, because, of course, you still have to have the stove, and then you have to have the time in the day, of course, which is
the time. And if you're working 3 jobs, you're pretty happy to have ultra-processed foods.
Yeah, exactly, which is why it's incredibly inspiring to hear these stories of these individual efforts, but it still seems like there would be a lovely role for our government to help with.
Well, the best thing they could do would be to provide money and equipment.
Yeah, exactly.
And better food.
And to provide childcare services, et cetera.
Oh, yeah, that too.
Exactly.
That too.
Well, Marion, I think we should end on this positive note of these wonderful stories of the ability to turn things around, very human stories, to have a human solution to this human-made problem. But it's really been a pleasure to spend time with you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, the pleasure's mine. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Healthy Dialogue. I'm Derek Angus, and I've been chatting with Marion Nestle about the global obesity crisis. Look for a related episode next month as we speak with Drs. Lottie Knudsen and Jens Holst about their roles in the discovery and development of GLP-1 receptor agonists. And keep an eye out for the report from the JAMA Summit on obesity. This episode was produced by Daniel Morrow, Matthew O'Connor, and myself at the JAMA Network. If you have any questions or comments, let us know at healthydialogue@jamanetwork.org, and we'll try to respond in a future episode. To follow this and the other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com or search Healthy Dialogue wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
This content is protected by copyright by the American Medical Association with all rights reserved, including those for text and data mining, AI training, and similar technologies.